Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. On today's show, I have Matt Hawkins. Matt is managing partner and founder of Entourage Effect Capital. Entourage is a US VC fund focused on the cannabis industry. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
No, real pleasure. How are you today?
I'm doing just fine, thanks.
Good. Loads to talk about. So maybe tell us a bit about your background and what led you to start Entourage and get involved in the cannabis space.
Sure. I've been in private equity for over 25 years in various forms and fashions. I've been with an institutional fund, a family office. I've raised several funds and special purpose vehicles for direct investments on my own. I had a timely exit in 2014, which led me to the next foray and chapter of my career. And one of the things I had done in the downturn was private lending. And in 2014 is obviously when the landscape changed in legalized cannabis with Colorado, Oregon, the state of Washington, all going adult use legal. And in Denver, there was a rush from warehouse owners looking to refinance their mortgages to get out of commercial debt into private debt so they could then lease their facilities to cannabis growers. At the time, I didn't know much of anything about the industry, but they were paying good yields. So I made a loan or two. But my luck and timing moment was when I realized that the yields would likely dry up on the real estate side, but the actual opportunity for investing through private equity vehicles in the cannabis sector itself would be robust, because I figured there'd be a dearth of capital due to the federal illegality. And so what we did, we put together a first fund, and then we raised our second. Now we're raising our third, and we've got 65 investments. We're pretty happy with where we are right now.
Cool. And you said you didn't know much about cannabis before. When you first started to consider it, were there any issues that you were facing in terms of the stigma?
Sure. I mean, heck, I live in Dallas, Texas. You kidding me? This is a conservative bastard state. And when I was telling people in 14 what I was doing, they looked at me like I had like 3 heads. So it was, it's pretty crazy. So yeah, I had a lot of professionals sit me down and say, are you really sure about this? You're going to damage your reputation. And I just knew that if I stuck with it and had some success, that, I'd overcome that. And sure enough, some of those people that talked to me about it in 14 negatively have now invested in Fund 3.
Right. Fantastic. So why don't we talk a bit about what Entourage does? What's your strategy? Where are you focusing on? Those sort of things.
Sure. Historically, we've been an investor that is tried to bring diversification to our investors, which are primarily high net worth individuals and family offices. So it's our belief that if you haven't invested in the industry, the best thing to do is to use a fund concept to give you that, shotgun approach versus a rifle approach, or else you'll get burned. And we've, because we've been in the industry as long as we have, I like to say we know where the bodies are buried, and we know where all the landmines are. So from that standpoint, we've certainly had our bumps and bruises, but we do know where to look for the right deals. And Fund 3 will be slightly different in that it's a lot larger than what we've raised previously. And we'll be looking to make, transformative investments to, effectuate M&A activity or scale building opportunities for, some of the middle to larger size companies that are in the space. So it'll be more traditional, growth capital, acquisition financing versus the, seed stage investing in Fund 1 and the Series A investing in Fund 2.
In terms of sectors or subsectors, really, are you across the whole value chain, or are there specific areas you focus on?
We're pretty agnostic. I would say we probably gravitate to everything above cultivation. I mean, if there is obviously we like vertically integrated plays, but it's not but straight cultivation is tricky. You never want to catch that falling knife on a commodity, which is what obviously we're trending towards, if not already there.
Yeah. And do you get involved in the science and the medical side of things as well?
We do. Fund 2 has a pretty broad scope of investments, from biosynthesis to, some of the different technologies out there for, genetics and cloning. We also are in the, supply chain management software business in the cannabis space. But we're also, heck, we were early investors in GTI. We were early investors in EBU, which sold Canopy Growth, early investors in Acreage when it was High Street Capital. So, we had one of the Florida licenses that sold Ianthus. Luckily, we sold that a long time ago. So yeah, we've been, we've been across the board from, just, the multi-state operator operating model to all the way down to, like I said, like biosynthesis and other kind of step out type categories.
Yeah. And do you get involved in any of the industrial hemp side of things?
Not really. I mean, once the Farm Bill passed, the straight, hemp-based CBD sector got pretty tricky just because the FDA hasn't provided any real guidance yet. So it's the wild, wild west. You can cross state lines, with the product, but yet you don't know what you can and can't say. And so, we like the protections that are there and the moat that's built around, the licensing model state to state for THC.
Cool. And so how many portfolio companies do you currently have under your?
Well, throughout our whole ecosystem, which, like I said, comprises 2 funds and a whole bunch of different sidecars and special purpose entities, there's 65 investments. And in Fund 3, we'll probably add another 20 or so, and that would give us a pretty substantial number of in terms of assets under management at that point.
Yeah, that's quite a big family you got there.
Well, some were, we're more active in some than others. Some were, we're minority investors in most of them, but in some cases, we're active minority investors. Like our larger positions, obviously, we have some, board seats or enough belts and suspenders there to make sure that we can effectuate change and guidance when necessary.
Yeah, and it's an interesting area actually. How active do you get in terms of management of the businesses and supporting the entrepreneurs?
Well, our model is we back good management teams. That's really at the core of what our private equity model is, excuse me. But we are certainly able to come in when we need to. Like we have executed 2 turnarounds to date where we actually, effectively took over the company. So from that standpoint, it's a little bit different than some of the other models out there that are just buyout shops, for example, that really like to bring in their own management. So yeah, so we're comfortable with this model. I think the good news is that for cannabis, there's more and better operators entering the space every day. So you can, look at track records of them outside the space. And in a lot of cases, there's enough successful operators in the space. You can look at their track records both outside and inside the cannabis space.
Yeah, it's a really interesting aspect, which I suppose is more prevalent in a more sophisticated, more mature market like the North American market, where you've got exactly a potential track record, whereas it doesn't really exist in Europe at the moment, I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're just a couple of steps ahead of Europe. I mean, Europe is, not far behind. We've got actually a substantial investment in the Netherlands that could be a good beachhead for us because they're about to enter Germany. So we keep a strong eye on that. We're contemplating putting some dedicated capital outside of Fund 3 into the European space, but it's tricky. It's just a matter of where do we spend our time and resources, and it's hopefully we will have enough bench strength to focus on Europe when the time is right.
Yeah, there's positive movements, but similar to the US, there's a lot of regulatory hurdles to sort of harmonize and sort out. So, I think everyone's working on that quite hard.
Exactly.
And so when you talked about management, that you kind of back good management teams, at what sort of stage do you guys get involved? At seed, do you get involved at seed, pre-revenue, or do you need to see a track record first?
Yeah, so we have matured along with the industry. So in 2014, when we were making investments, the only thing that was out there were angel investing. So, back then, $500,000 could move the needle on these startups. And so that's what we did. And we hit some pretty big home runs, but it was more venture capital. We also had some goose eggs. Fund 2 is different. Fund 2 was more Series A. There were a few further along companies that actually had some, EBITDA that was, it's always nice to be able to get the right valuation on profitable companies. And we were able to do that. And Fund 3 is going to be even further down the road just because we're writing bigger checks, as I mentioned, and we're going to be, probably doing more growth capital investing to really provide the rocket fuel for these companies to take the next step and create scale, all in advance of likely quasi legalization within the next 3 to 5 years. And that's the whole trick is that if we have enough And it's not like I'm giving away our secret sauce, because we, like I said, with the 65 companies we have and the relationships we have in the industry, we are better equipped to go out and build that scale within the existing companies in the industry to be attractive to institutional capital, big pharma, tobacco, alcohol, spirits, nutraceuticals, CPG companies, you name it, when they all are coming in this with full force once the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange open up, which, there's some people that think that could happen as soon as when the Safe Banking Act passes the Senate, which could happen, if we're lucky, sometime in 21.
Wow. I mean, given the unpredictability of, legislative change, do you bake that into your strategy in terms of how you look at companies?
No, and we never have. But quite honestly, at this point, it's so undeniable that we'd be foolish not to. I think the stats are 1 in 3 of Americans now live in a adult use legal state, and over 50% of Americans live in a robust medicinal state. I mean, look, the MORE Act, while it's flawed, is still a step, in a good direction, and that's going to pass the House pretty easily, it looks like. It won't reach the Senate. I mean, the Senate McConnell probably won't even let it get voted on, but nevertheless, we're at the point now where we're trying to go as fast as we can to build that scale and in advance of all these legislative changes that likely will happen. And if they don't, if it's another 5 to 10 years, that's okay too, because the industry is undeniable and its growth is undeniable. And COVID has proven to be a boom for the industry in that we've actually converted a pretty significant portion of the illicit market just because we're safer. And, we've got delivery and curbside pickup and masks, social distancing. Well, that's a heck of a lot safer than going and buying it from the street corner guy. And not to mention all the different protocols. Look, we've had all these scares over the past couple of years with the vape crisis and whatnot, but I think it's always comes back and points to this is the regulated, legalized industry is much, much safer than the illicit one. And I think and in a time of a pandemic, people even realize that even more than they would otherwise.
Yeah. And I think you make an interesting point, because the growth rates are impressive alone at the current trajectory. So I guess if it further opens up, that's going to be a bonus.
That's right.
Yeah. So, you mentioned you've had some great results. You've also had some slightly less welcome results. Care to mention any of the sort of learnings that you got from some of the mistakes? You don't really call them mistakes, but the things that haven't worked out quite as well.
Sure. I think the biggest mistake that we made early on was not recognizing how much capital some of these companies would need to be successful, and then B, not being able to provide that capital, even if we did recognize that, because we didn't. The first fund was, we had a $10 million fund with a $20 million kind of a side pocket, and then fund 2 was $60 million, and now we're raising a substantially larger third fund. But money is not unlimited, and we're not the only ones. Look, we're one of several capital providers in the industry, and there's a dearth of capital, and there will be until institutional capital comes into play. So I can sit here and say that we learned our lesson, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we can make it better, because we can't just create money out of thin air for this industry.
Yeah. And how much of it is talent within the industry?
A big portion. There's no question early on there wasn't enough talent. And I think that we probably got too enamored with what we thought was good talent in the beginning, just because it was a shiny new object. And our underwrite now on management teams is a lot more stringent than it was back then. So that's a fair point. That we learned that lesson too.
Yeah. And hopefully it's improving over time. So as your name is the Entourage Effect, how important is the family aspect of the fund? And do you cross-pollinate? Do you stimulate business within your portfolio, between your portfolio businesses?
Sure. Good question. Just give you a little historical background on us. What's interesting is we started out in 2014 as Cresco Capital Partners, and Cresco, Latin for grow. And next thing I know, I'm friends with the guys at Cresco Labs. And I'm like, wait a minute, we have the same damn name. And we were getting confused with one another. We have no connection to the fact that we're in the industry, and we're in the capital providing business. They're in the multi-state operating business. And so we just got tired of getting confused. So we changed the name a year and a half ago, I think, to Entourage Effect Capital, because to your point, it does encapsulate what we're all about. And, the Entourage Effect in the industry, obviously is, the interaction of the THC and CBD and other cannabinoids to give, healing benefits to the end user. And So we thought that was a perfect name. And because, to your point, we do provide, help and guidance to our family of companies. And in some cases, we cross-pollinate's not the word, but we certainly look to create scale within our portfolio. So if that means that we want to bring another company that's outside of the family into the family, and we find current portfolio companies that could bolt on to those companies, and well, of course, we're going to do that. And our third fund has a limited partner advisory committee that helps us navigate the potential conflicts that could arise. But at the end of the day, this is a high class problem, and we have, even when we don't have large investments in some of these companies, because of our industry experience and how many companies that we work with, they lean on us and they look to us. They look for, and so we're able to say, hey, have you looked at this company? This makes sense for you. Or hey, let me introduce you to this company. I think you should put it on your shelves. Or hey, what about this manufacturing company? Have you thought about them as, advanced extraction methods? I mean, things like that we, because of how long we've been doing this and just because of how big we've gotten, I mean, we'd be fools not to do that. That's the benefit to taking our capitals. We're not just capital. We bring a lot more than that to the table, which is important in a cottage industry like this.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to hear. Great to hear. Cool. Okay. Well, that's talking about Entourage. Maybe we'll talk about something a bit topical. There was a slightly large event that happened in the US a few weeks ago, the elections. Not to get into the political side of things, but a clear winner from the election was cannabis. How have you sort of seen that in terms of the various states that sort of come online?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody was looking for the blue wave, and what's funny is it's kind of turned into be the green wave, and that it's you had every state that was on the every initiative was on the ballot for New Jersey, Arizona, South Dakota, and Montana. Am I missing one? I think that's it. Anyway, but nevertheless, they all passed with flying colors. It just shows you how bipartisan the support is, as I mentioned the stats earlier. So, yeah, that was a big deal for the industry. I mean, New Jersey and Arizona are obviously huge markets, and that's great for the industry. I think, not to get into the political conversation, but obviously a Biden-Harris administration at least brings more, visibility to the industry just because they're willing to comment on it. Trump really didn't really get in the way. He just stayed out of the way, really, but just didn't comment much on it. I mean, at the beginning, it was rough when Jeff Sessions was the attorney general, but once he pushed him out, it was really just, the federal government was just hands off. They're just like, look, just keep it within your state, don't cross lines, and everybody's gonna be just fine. So that's kind of the way, and it'll continue that way until there's more legislative movement. But I think that we're just going to get more attention, which is good.
And were you surprised by the green wave? Like, were you surprised at how kind of wholehearted it was?
Yeah. I mean, it's undeniable. You can go in every major city in the nation, if not in smaller towns too, and the stigma's gone. I mean, it's just is. I mean, you can go to a cocktail party and there's people handing out, edibles. I mean, people don't care anymore. And then obviously with all the medicinal benefits too, that every day people uncover, it's there. It's not going away. I think and again, with COVID, not only did I talk about the safety aspects of it, but let's face it, every single level of government, from the federal government down to the municipal levels, has shortfalls in their budgets now due to COVID. I mean, at the local and state level, there's sales tax shortages. At the federal government, there's obviously, with all the stimulus money going out, I mean, they need new sources of revenue. So even conservatives that aren't necessarily way, way, way far right are seeing the benefit of this. I mean, this exists. It's there. Why not tax and regulate it? It just doesn't make sense to not do it. And in the meantime, you would likely decrease crime too.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of positive implications of it. So where do you see it going from here? The other big states like New York and those coming online would obviously be a big thing. But do you think intra-state commerce and sorting that out would be useful?
Yeah, I think that's a long time away. I think, New York, Connecticut, I still think it's even with, my personal opinion is that something like the States Act passes, which would the federal government would, basically remove the federal illegality and let states operate on a state by state basis. Kind of, very similar to what, alcohol alcohol laws are state based, really. I mean, and so in terms of how their value chain works, and so at some point it'll cross state lines. I don't think it'll happen right away because I don't think you're gonna. A lot of these states aren't going to want to give away their revenue. I mean, California is not going to want their companies to buy raw material from elsewhere, and then they also don't want raw material going to other states. I mean, they want to keep it within, and so there's going to be some of that pushback from the states that are already in play, and that's okay. I mean, it's the only downside is that it's harder to build a national brand when you can't cross state lines, but it's already getting them. You're starting to see some successful brands going from one state to the other, and I think that'll continue.
Yeah, and what would you see as the major potential roadblocks? Is it individuals like McConnell, for example, or are there any other big things that might slow progress?
Yeah, I mean, clearly you would hope that Mitch McConnell at some point would just realize that, even his own constituents would probably support him, at least taking the conversation to the floor of the Senate. When you just sit there and unilaterally say no, it really just doesn't do a whole lot, for me. But and I think it'll get there, especially with depending on what happens in Georgia. I mean, I'm not going to speculate on if one or both. Obviously the Democrats need both to control the Senate, but even if that doesn't happen, I still think the lessening of the majority, will get the Republicans' attentions to at least work more on a bipartisan level. And quite frankly, I would look, and now we're getting to politics, which I hate getting into, but I would just hope that regardless of what your politics are, the past 4 years have been miserable with the he said, she says nonsense from both parties. I mean, at some point they're going to have to get back to square one and just say, can we at least just try to work together? And if that happens, I would challenge anybody to tell me what is a more, bipartisan friendly issue than what this is, because both sides can say, I want it legalized for this reason. And, the far left would say, well, there's social implications for it and the justice reform. Then also the right can say, well, I want more revenue. And they're both there. So just shut up and go do it.
Yeah. It's a very unifying message. And do you think medical kind of sits in the middle there because everyone needs healthcare, really?
Absolutely. I think there's no question that I think that both the Republicans may say that, well, medical cannabis needs to be researched further and all that. And, that's where that's where I go tone deaf and say, for Christ's sake, people, just get in a room and figure it
out. That would be nice.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. So as we draw to the end, I just, obviously you've got a huge amount of experience in this area. What would your advice for entrepreneurs be that are looking at this area?
That are entrepreneurs that are looking to enter the space or have entered the space and looking for
both, actually. That's a good distinction, yeah.
It's a tough one. Obviously in the legalized, it's as the states grow, it also depends on where you live. If you're lucky enough to live in a state where it just passed, go get a license. Invest your time and money, your own money, or, raise friends and family money, go get a license. And, that has value. And so that to me has always been and those types of entrepreneurs really align themselves well with folks like us because they're putting their sweat equity and their own money at play at first. So that's obviously one area. The others are, if you're an entrepreneur and you're having some success in what you're doing, go out and try to find someone else that's doing the same thing and merge your companies, create scale on your own. Because you're going to be more attractive to folks like us, or even in the end game, somebody that wants to just take you out.
Fantastic. Yeah, good. Well, thank you.
You bet.
Matt, that's been really good and brilliant overview of what you guys do and the upshot from the election in terms of cannabis. So, yeah, thank you for all of that.
Absolutely. Thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.